what it's called. Now, where did the word Hinduism come into play, right? So long time ago, there you were some Persian scholars who were visiting India, and they saw these people live a unique lifestyle. And there used to be a river called Sindhu. Now that river since then doesn't exist, it's dried up. So there's been migrations, people have moved all over, but they saw these people live a unique lifestyle. And then that word Sindhu became Hindu. And then the Hinduism term kind of stuck to us. And, okay, we'll take it, so that's how it's more popular as Hinduism. So where does it come from? Where it doesn't belong to one text or sort of one following. It's what we call as a divinely revealed religious spiritual tradition. So there's no founder of Hinduism. And basically that divine knowledge exists in all of us. Okay. So if you have the right merit and the right discipline, and if you meditate or if you do the right things in life, that knowledge gets revealed to you. And that sort of, in a way, I believe happens to all faiths in a way. We just kind of look at it or apply it in different ways. But there's a lot of sages in the past who had that revelation, and all their, sort of answers ended up being exactly the same. So whatever their thoughts were, whatever their things were revealed to them, they all got compiled together. And over thousands of years, there's all these scriptures that came into play. So that is what Hinduism is all about. As I said, it exists in the Indian subcontinent. It is one of the most ancient faiths that exist. The oldest kind of dated things you can see is about 5,000 years, but we think it's even much older than that. Unfortunately, Indian subcontinent went through a lot of invasions over time. We got invaded by Alexander the Great, the Persians came, we had the East India Company rule us for 200 years. So there's a lot of sort of, movement, destruction, whatever you want to call it. So a lot of the faith, based things kind of got segregated, separated, and over time. But luckily, Hinduism is a verbally sort of transmitted religion. So, a lot of the things the scriptures are very poetic in nature. And it's easier to remember a poem versus kind of a monologue, right? So a lot of that knowledge did get transmitted over time. And you can't really have a paper manuscript from 5000 BC still surviving, even if it was in pristine condition. We all know that. So over time, that knowledge did get transmitted. So the good thing is, even with all this time frame, Hinduism still kind of exists. It's the third largest religion in the world. So, you have Islam, you have Christianity. Hinduism actually is the third one. Now, most of the people practicing this faith are based in India or the Indian subcontinent. So 1.1 billion people, 1 out of every 7 people on this planet is a Hindu right now, but nobody knows about it, which is kind of a best kept secret. Let's just put it that way. 95% Hindus live in India. So how about the United States? You were asking, it's about 2.5 million. I mean, how weak our census is, right? It's usually about 5 years old. And I don't know why they even do it, but so about 2.5, 3 million Hindus in the United States right now, and about 50,000 only in the greater Minnesota. Most of them, I think, are concentrated in the Twin Cities region right now. So that's what you're seeing.
Question.
Yes.
Is Sanskrit also a verbal language or only a written language?
No, it is a verbal and
written. Yes. So when the stories were passed down, they were passed down verbally instead.
Verbally, right? Exactly.
And then more recently written in Sanskrit.
So there's actually a script. So it's called the Devanagari script. That's what we call it. So that script. So interesting about languages, there are about 24 official languages in India right now, about 1,700 dialects. There's different scripts. So you can speak in Sanskrit and you can write it down in a totally different script. And you wouldn't have a clue what this script is unless someone starts talking to you and you're like, hey, by the way, that is Sanskrit. So that is where things got very, very diverse over thousands of years. But to answer your question, it is a language spoken. We used to call it the language of the gods. Devanagari is, Dev means God, and Nagar means the place where the gods live. So it's a very, very ancient language. And out of that language came a lot of other languages. What is also interesting is the grammar in Sanskrit is very similar to Russian. You'll see some resemblance in Latin. So it's one of the root languages, we call it. There's been studies done which show that computer languages that say are based on Sanskrit, the computers actually do a pretty good job. So kind of a very, very basic root language. That's what it is. So As I said, Hindus in Minnesota. So approximately 50,000 here. The earliest Hindus came to Minnesota in the 70s, and some of the families came together and they formed what was called as the Hindu Society of Minnesota. Okay, that was formed in 78. They bought a small church in central Minneapolis where they used to come together to pray and worship. And finally, they did kind of buy a piece of land in the 1990s in Maple Grove, and then a temple was constructed in 2006. So we actually completed 15 years at that temple right now. In fact, the governor, the senators, we just had a function last year where, we kind of celebrated the 15 years in the making, and it'll be about 45 years that the Hindu Society has been around for. But that is not the only temple. It is the largest temple in Minnesota, probably one of the largest in the United States as well. And then there are smaller temples here, which I've listed down below, and they're kind of spread all over Minnesota, but they're on a much smaller scale. Hindu temples don't have membership. You can just go and visit a temple, just pray, worship, and walk away. That's traditionally how, because you can't really own spirituality. You have it all, it's within me, so I can travel anywhere I want. So that's how it is. But there's some temples which, you need money, unfortunately, to kind of make things work. So they will ask for donations. If you want to become a member and support them, it's always welcome. So that's kind of what we see here. That's the Hindu temple, the one you were talking about. So that thing you see here, that's the tall tower, okay? And temples traditionally have been built on an ancient science, okay? So kind of, you see, this is called as the Gopuram. So there's a very tall structure, which again, I say, if you go to a mosque, if you look at some ancient churches, they always have these tall structures. Look at the pyramids, right? Again, I think scientifically, it's a way to harness the energy around us, the physical energy, and that just helps us feel better, focus better. So I think those temples were designed in a specific way. They always, Hindu temples face a certain direction. They'll always face east-west. Guess what? The sun rises in the northeast, sets in the west. So you're harnessing the solar energy as well. And that makes you feel great as well. So that's what you're looking at. So that's the main entrance. It's always closed because of Minnesota. You will probably kind of walk from underneath, but that's what the temple it looks like. So what does the Hindu belief system talk about, right? So the most common misnomer about Hinduism is they worship a lot of gods and goddesses. That's the most common thing people talk about. Well, that's actually not true, okay? We believe there is one supreme divine consciousness, okay? That's kind of what we call it as Brahman. That's kind of the Sanskrit word for it. It is existing eternally, okay? It is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, meaning it's everywhere. It is beyond what we can imagine. It's full of life and consciousness, okay? It has three qualities to kind of put it in a human way. It's true, it's living, or it's conscious, and it's full of bliss. It's not happiness, it's bliss. It's one level up. So those are the properties of it. So if you experience it, you know that everything around you now doesn't matter anymore. So it's something beyond what you or me can think in physical terms, okay? Now, okay, that is the big deal, right? So where do we fit in the mix? Where does the earth, the creation come into the mix? We believe that this physical universe comes out of the divine. So we're not there's no creator out there who just made like a block of Legos. It's coming from within that creation. That is what we believe. So the physical universe comes out of the divine, and it is cyclical. So based on the mercy of that divine consciousness, this universe comes into play. It exists for billions of years and goes back into its sublime state. And this is cyclical. It's been going on for countless billions and billions of years, because time is eternal when it comes to divine, and it will continue to do so. So we're just a little fleck of dust or time, you want to call it, in this whole creation, but we take our lives too seriously, right? That's why we fight with each other, do some silly stuff out there, but there's more to this than what meets the eye. All right. So as I said, it's beyond time, space, form, gender, and it's impossible to quantify. We're talking about that term God. So it's beyond us, but we are limited to our physical senses, so we say, God made man in his form. So, hey, I'll have two hands and two legs and a face. Maybe he or she looks like that. So we kind of label God in a different way, but it's just a humanistic way to kind of connect the dots, right? Now, within this universe, if I pray to God in a certain way, that God or that energy or that consciousness can come to me in a finite form, because that's how I'm going to relate to it. So that divine can manifest in finite and approachable forms, but that is not what it is. It can come to you in different ways, whatever your desire is, if you wish to connect to it. Based on our temperament, we choose to pray to either these manifestations or meditate on the absolute divine. So the thing with Hinduism is there is no dogma. There is no one way to do it. You are free to choose. There's different ways that are shown in front of you, and there's people who walk that path, and you can follow what you feel based on your temperament is, what part of the life. I mean, if I'm a kid, I'm not forced to do like rituals and prayers and stuff. You just enjoy your life, right? Because there's God within you, you do your thing. But as an adult, I can make choices, but we don't have any specific ceremonies, or you don't kind of get subscribed to something. You have the freedom to choose and connect to that divine spirit in whichever way or shape or form. Okay. Yes, sir.
Can you say a little bit more about what you mean, pray to the manifestations?
Right. It's coming up in a second.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question. Yep. So, as I said, Hindus, based on the temperament. Now, we talked about the absolute divine, which is with beyond form, it's timeless, it's eternal. Now, that divine creates this manifestation of this universe, right? And within that, there could be, so if you talk about heaven or hell, these are realms that exist beyond the physical, and there could be manifestations and form in these realms. But also on a physical level, on this planet or on this earth, if there is an imbalance of good or bad, or things need to be taught in the right way, that divine spirit or that divine consciousness will take a mortal form. Okay. And that's what is called as an avatar, not the movie Avatar, but that is a Sanskrit word, by the way. It means incarnation of a divine form. So in the Hindu scriptures, there have been multiple forms that have come, not all human forms. They have been different forms that have come. And we believe there's one more form that will come, and that will set the tone for either good, where there'll be lasting peace for a while, or the cycle of existence will change and we'll go back to our original form, and then the creation starts all over again. So that's kind of what we believe. The last form, you probably had a talk on Buddhism probably already, or not yet. We've had a talk. So one of the avatars was actually Gautam Buddha, who actually became, a monk, and he is the one who kind of spread Buddhism, right? Again, it's a way of life, it's a way of thought, but he was supposed to be the eighth form, the ninth form, which was the very last one that came into play. Now you're like, well, Hindus, Buddhism. So as I said, it's a way of life. So it doesn't mean that Hinduism is all end all. There's three religions that actually came out of Hinduism, which I'll talk in a bit, but Buddhism was one of those. So Buddha is supposed to be an avatar of the divine, and that's what we believe.
So how are the avatars like predicted or realized once they exist? Like what's the
time span? Or
like how would someone say, oh, Buddha was an avatar? Or how would someone know when the next avatar?
So there's some like mathematical calculations that have been done, or based on like certain events that have happened in the past, they will predict it. Nobody knows exactly when it's going to happen. Some say it'll be like, so each, sort of cycle of existence is broken down into like 4 parts. Okay. And unfortunately, things degrade over time. I mean, think about our lives, we're full of energy, and then we kind of, whittle away until, it's like the seasons in Minnesota, right? The leaves fall and winter comes, but spring comes back, right? So the end cycle is always sort of the shortest cycle. And there's a lot of bad things that happen, like there's more sin and people are making bad choices. And the final form is called Kalki. That's the name we give it to it. I mean, the books say, he'll come descending down from the heavens on a white horse and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, he'll probably come in a Tesla, right? I mean, there's no way you're going to drive a horse out there. I'm kidding, by the way. Okay. But so these are all sort of revelations that were done. What's interesting is the very first form, I always like to share the story, is what we call as a fish form. As I said, Hinduism was not limited only to human forms. And the story goes, there used to be this good pious person going to the water every morning. He would do his daily ablutions and then get on with his life. Well, one morning, a little fish jumped out of the water and said, "Hey, can you please help me? Can you save me?" And he's like, "Wow, a talking fish. That's interesting." He's like, "What do you want me to do?" He's like, "Well, a big fish is probably going to eat me. Can you help me out?" So he's like, "Sure." So he took a little pot, put some water, put the fish, and took it home. Next morning, the fish grew a lot bigger. He's like, "Wow, a talking and a growing fish. Okay, that's kind of sounds cool." So every day, the fish just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it got so big. He's like, "I can keep you in my home, and you can fend for yourself." So he put that fish back in the water. When that happened, a divine form of that avatar came out of the water and said to him, "I was just testing you to see if you're the right person for this job." He's like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "There's going to be a big flood that's going to be coming down here very soon, and the whole creation is going to go underwater. So I'm going to send a boat down your way, and you have to make sure that you have these 7 sages and their families and flora and fauna, which I'll tell you, load those guys on the boat, and I will make sure you guys stay afloat until the floodwaters recede, and then the creation starts all over again." Have you heard that story before?
Mm-hmm.
So that is the first form of Vishnu. Vishnu is kind of, we give names to the manifestations, right? So Vishnu is the form, and that's the fish form, because the revelation happened in form of a fish, but that was kind of the first form of Hinduism, or the starting of the creation, basically.
That's really interesting, because there's a really famous, I lived in Guatemala for a long time. There's a very famous Quechua story that's almost the same, but it doesn't end up with Noah.
Yes.
But it's about a girl who saves a fish, and the fish grows and gets bigger. And
So what I find fascinating is
very
even in the native, Americans, there's actually a story on a flood. So if you sort of, take away all the dogmas of all the religions, you will see a common theme come into play. And, scientifically speaking, thousands of years ago, our Earth looked a lot different, right? I mean, the continents have moved, and that's all scientific. Everything's moved around. So maybe everybody stayed together. They all came from this flood. Who knows? And then things kind of over thousands of years sort of, spread apart. But it's a very unique story to have in so many multiple faiths or parts of the world. So that's always an interesting concept.